Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Mastering Retention Podcast. Super exciting podcast. This is the first time we're using the Riverside recording thing, so hopefully it's working really well. And we have another podcast host with us, Miss Maria from the Metacast. Hello, Maria. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to talk all about gaming product managers today, I think. So it's going to be a really, really good one. But before we delve into that, I always like to ask, what's your story? Like, how'd you get into making games?
Gosh, my story. How long can I take telling it? I'll try to keep it to 2 minutes. Just speak through it.
Love it.
So I grew up in Portugal, and there's not much of a gaming industry there. So I never really thought it was an option for me. So I went in a completely different career track. I worked in fisheries for a bit, like for about 4 years. I was doing sales and just helping manage fishing vessel repairs. And so at one point I decided I wanted to try to maybe one day get into games. And I knew that was going to take quite a long time because I knew nothing about technology. I studied graphic design. And so I was actually unemployed for about half a year, just sending out CVs. Trying to get a tech company in Portugal to hire me to do biz dev. Fortunately, after a few scam interviews with some shady companies, I managed to land a great job in a tech consultancy company, and that brought me to London. I entered financial regulation AI technology. I met someone who used to work at Jagex, and that's how I got into games. I became a product manager for the publishing platform at Jagex. And that led me to today, where I'm a product manager for a game at Hutch.
What game is that?
Top Drives. An excellent game. Highly recommend go and see it. It's very unique.
Tell us more about it. Yeah, what is Top Drives for people that haven't played it?
It's a card collection game. And you have 5 opponent cards. So they're all based on real cards, real stats. And you play your hand against opponents. And then it does simulations of the race, like all based on physics, like as close as we can reinterpret them in a game. And then also based on the stats and the performance of the cars. You have different types of tracks to test different aspects of the car. It was really fun. I never played... I didn't even know it existed, to be honest, until I played it, because I'm not much into cars. So I think user acquisition never picked me. It's really, really fun.
That's great. Cool. Okay. So we're going to talk about product managers today. And I feel like different companies, especially in gaming, have different names for what they do. So can you clarify, when you say product manager, like, what does that actually mean?
That's a really good question. And it's not only in games. I found it's just tech in general. And I'll try to... I will share what I think it is and how I see the role. If you ask different people, different companies, they'll probably say something a little bit different. So I think first there's something that's a bit confusing out there, which is product manager and then product owner. And that's been a huge debate in many companies that I've worked in on what each of those roles do. I personally just say a product owner is a product manager that's working in Scrum. And scrum.org. Why did you bring yet another name for product management? So I think product managers work at the intersection of business, design, and technology. So you have to understand all of those different pillars. And I think the thing that I love about product management and makes me excited to do my work every day is that you get to work at very high level for the product, but also quite detailed. And so you can be talking about you can be aligning with the product director on what the vision of the product is, discussing the strategy, so how your strategic pillars, understanding problems in the market or pain points or opportunities, creating a roadmap to deliver that strategy, and then going into feature design. It depends on the company how involved the product manager is at all of these different levels. And so I think that's one of the most important things when trying to find a role in product management is knowing what do you like to do What do you see the role as? And then try to find a company where you can fit with that.
Interesting. So specifically inside games, how many product managers should a game have? Is it one product manager? Is it multiple product managers? Is there a distinction of when you need more than one?
Oh, it depends. Anytime I hear a podcast and you ask a difficult question and then the guest says, oh, it depends, I always get triggered. So I'm very sorry, listeners, if I just triggered you. I think that comes down to you as a product manager, what kind of environment you like to work on. So when I was working at Jagex on the publishing platform, we were a team of 4 product managers and a product director. And it worked very well because we each had ownership over a section of the product. There was a PM for accounts, there was a PM for e-commerce, there was a PM for game services, and a PM for data. I think it gets a little bit trickier when working on a game where you don't have clear areas of ownership, because product managers like responsibility and they like to own and experiment like with the strategy and be able to make decisions. And so if you don't have those clear areas of responsibility and you have a lot of product managers, it can become a situation of too many cooks and you don't really have the opportunity to have a vision and lead that vision as a PM. So I think it really comes down to the company. How big is the game? You could have a product, if it's a big game, you could have a product manager for the quests, just like narrative content for players to go through. You could have a product manager for live ops. You could have a product manager for new skills or something like that. If it's a small game, I think it becomes difficult to have multiple PMs. But yeah, it depends on the structure.
So maybe I'll ask a few more questions and we can see if we can suss out a little bit more info here. So maybe taking a step back and think about it in a different way. What, in your opinion, is the ideal high-performing product management team? Like, how should you combine a game director and a product manager?
There's a lot of information out there, and from what I've experienced and also learned so far is that there are many archetypes of product managers out there, and the best high-performing team usually mixes product managers with different strong suits. And it also depends on having the fit of the product manager and their skills and what drives them with the maturity of the product. So the key pillars are understanding engineering, being comfortable with data and getting insights from data, understanding business strategy, and also understanding design. And within games, I include both UX and also game design, really. And then usually product managers have a very strong suit out of those 4. So for example, mine, I believe, is the business strategy side of it. But I work with a PM colleague, and his strong suit is data, because we have completely different backgrounds. And then you usually have a second strong suit out of those 4. And personally, I believe you achieve the best results when, for example, you're pairing, if it's a game director and a product manager, pairing the 2 who have different strong suits to get the best results. And in terms of the archetypes of the product maturity, it takes very different product mindsets to build a completely new product versus continuing to grow an existing product versus having a product that's reaching its peak of maturity and you're trying to find the next thing to bring it back to the beginning stages of the maturity. And so I think you have to find what drives the person so that they're passionate about what they're doing and how their brain works when thinking about like what's best for the product.
Interesting. Very interesting. I like that. Okay. A couple more questions related to product managers here. What are good product management traits that you should look for in a person, or maybe you might uncover in yourself and you never realized that you would be a good product manager? Like, what sort of traits should a product manager have?
That's a good question. I actually think because nowadays you don't have a degree really in product management. I think there are some universities now in the United States that are starting to do it, but no one really has like biology. Instead of biology, you have product management. And I just stumbled into the role. I was actually working with someone when I was in the fintech company. Someone in leadership just walked up to me one day and said, "You'd be a great product manager. You should go and check it out." And so that's how I found out that this exists as a role, and it's great. And so when looking for people entering the role, I think there are definitely some traits that if you see in someone, you can think, okay, maybe we should introduce them to what product management is because they might enjoy it and be really good at it. I think one of them is just natural curiosity. And you always want to know why, you always want to know more. You don't take things for granted. Like if you see a behavior of a user, or if you see a piece of data, you always want to go and find out why that's happening. So just that curiosity of always wanting to uncover. I think a second trait is being opinionated, to be honest, because you have to create hypotheses. And I think the interesting thing is I have to find someone who is opinionated, balanced with wanting to prove themselves wrong. I think that's the powerful combination for a great product manager, because you're constantly thinking about, oh, maybe this is because of that, but now I want to actually go and try to find out if I'm wrong.
Do you think, and this is more for my edification, because I apparently became a product manager too, and I had no idea that I was doing that. But I've always had this ability, and I think it really came to light when so I was actually going to school to become a doctor, and I was taking a human physiology class, and I had this uncanny ability to like always keep the big picture of like the human being in mind, but I could narrow in on any like minute detail of like the human body and like what this gland did and how it interacted with all these other pieces. And I could always zoom back out and see how everything was kind of interrelated, but I could zoom really in on those like minute details and I knew all the depth of it. And something about my mind is just wired of like, if that information ties together like that, it sticks with me really well. Now, if it's just like random information, I'm terrible with it, like names and things, terrible. But I'm curious, like, as a PM, should you be able to like have this combination of big picture mindset, but also like dig down to the minute details?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you have to be able to switch between the two very quickly, I find. And I think it's something that can be trained, but I think that's yet another trait. Like if you see someone is capable of having that kind of thinking, of just zooming in, zoom out, zoom in, zoom out, find correlations, find pulling information together to create this big picture. I think if you see someone being able to think that way, they'll probably be a good product manager. Because you have to be constantly interlinking the strategy and what you're trying to achieve and your goal and who are you serving, who's your customer, what is motivating them, to then the details of a specific functionality within a feature that you're talking with the team about or with the designers about. You have to be able to switch.
Yeah. Is there any way for someone to learn or develop that skill, or is that just something you have to inherently have?
I don't know. I'm usually biased. I don't believe that you are just born with something and then you'll never get it if you're not born with it. I think there are ways that you can train it. Personally, I've just been like that forever. So it's hard for me to say how you could train it, but I'm sure there's a way. In some of the courses that I've done, a lot of the practice is going through a full process of developing a new product. And so you go from the very high level market analysis, trying to find a strategic opportunity, down to the details of sketching wireframes and doing user interviews. And I think if you go through that process enough, you can learn how to think at the different stages. So even if it does not come naturally to you, you can learn what questions you should be asking yourself, depending what you're working on and what stage you're at.
That's great. Okay. So thinking about actually the full process brings me to something else. I've worked with some PMs that have, how would I say, always kind of had more structure in place versus, like they always came in and the game was already built and they like just needed to scale it or X, Y, Z. Do you feel like there is a different set of skills or traits that are required for like, that very early prototyping, like going from 0 to 1 versus, going from 1 to 100 or 100 to 10,000? Are there different skills and things that you need to be able to do at those different stages as a PM?
Yeah, I think there are different skills. There's a lot of interchangeable skills. I do think that there are specific skills depending on the maturity of the product. More than that, though, I think it's important to have a product manager that is passionate for what they're trying to achieve and what drives them to feel happy, satisfied that you've achieved a great thing. It comes down to personal core motivations, I think, because the product manager who jumps out of bed and wants to start from this blank slate doesn't mind that the results may be a year from now to understand whether they've been truly successful or not, and just be ready to fail massively over and over again. Because experimentation at that early stage, you can do some, but it's not like when you have this fully fledged product that you can just do very quick A/B tests on every week. And so I think that motivation versus the motivation of a product manager who is working with an existing product and just seeing that 1%, achieving that 1% just drives them to just to feel satisfied that they've made a huge impact. And that's what they want. They want that 1% plus that 1% plus that 1%. And that product manager who wants to start with the blank slate and do something that's just completely new and on a massive scale, that person won't feel motivated trying to increase that 1% and vice versa. And there are many more, I think, different stages that you can work in, but these are the two ends of the spectrum that I can think about. And I think overall you have to match that, or else the product manager might get burnt out or not enjoy their work, and then they'll leave and find another product to work on.
Yeah, I know for me, I've personally found that, and maybe this is the entrepreneurial spirit in me, but I really thrive in the chaos of that like early stage product where just things are just completely changing every single day. But then once you get to that scale phase, if an idea for a feature or something doesn't have like a good probability of generating like 20 to 50% like gains, to me, I'm like, well, what's the point? And that's the phase where I think having somebody with that more mindset of a 1% or 5% gain, which mind you is very key. Like you get 20 of those 5% gains and you've doubled your, impact or whatever your features. But so I love that.
Yeah, and just to add on, I've seen it in practice. I used to work with a product manager where that's what motivated him, that deeply in his core. And he was the most focused, effective product manager I've ever worked with a mature product, because he was so driven to do that 1% impact. I was very different. I'd be happy, but I wanted, like you were saying, just this more massive change. But it just made him amazing as a product manager and still being very successful, because that's where he thrives.
That's amazing. Cool. For, let's say, like newer stage startups or game teams, like at what point do you actually need a project manager? When should you be thinking about hiring?
So I actually believe that teams can do without a product manager, really. Because what a product manager does, if everyone on the team, or at least a few people on the team that have different roles, could be an engineer, it could be a designer, whoever they are, if you have the product management mindset, you don't need really a specific product manager, because you might be doing the steps, or you could have a product manager or a game director that's part-time on the project, hands reach, providing high-level steps that they should be going through and best practices. So I think if there's a startup out there, I wouldn't expect them to need a product manager's very early stage if they have that mindset. But if it's a team that is not comfortable with the product process and needs some coaching on what steps to go through and how to think and what to look for example, the soft launch stage, you definitely want people thinking in a product way on the different metrics that you should be evaluating, the different steps to evaluate those metrics. And so in those cases, I think it's helpful to have a product manager on a team to share that knowledge. But if you already have it, I don't think one is necessary.
Interesting.
And part of my role in a team, as just a product manager in general, what drives me is always trying to coach the team so I'm not needed. The less a product manager is needed on the team and the more autonomous they are without you, you've done a great job.
I love it. Thinking a little bit about hiring product managers, like how would you go about finding, hiring, and onboarding a product manager?
Hard. Yeah, it's quite, I think it's very difficult.
I ask because I see so many companies are looking for, game product managers right now. So I'm curious if there's a good way to go about doing so.
I can explain what I do in my day-to-day, and then I can explain what I know another product manager who works in a very big game company does in their day-to-day. So my friend, what she does is mostly work on spreadsheets, calculating and forecasting the P&L and helping prioritize what part of the product needs to be worked on. But they're essentially accountable for that massive spreadsheet and forecasting. In my role, I don't do forecasting here at Hutch. We have very intelligent people who are specialized in this, doing the forecasting. And I need to drive with the game director. He's ultimately accountable for the P&L. We need to drive what the roadmap is going to look like, the live content, how to improve the game, and what's our strategy, what are we focusing on to improve the game performance. And then I wear multiple hats. I do game design. I help out with UX design. I work at a strategy level. I design features. I work with the game designers. We refine them with the whole team. I participate in the development process, just supporting the understanding of what we're building. I work with the data analysts to validate our A/B tests and measure the success of what we released so that we can iterate quickly. I also speak with the community, doing ad hoc user interviews and just trying to understand why they play our game. So I wear all of these hats in my day. And we just have very completely different roles. Because if you ask me to do a forecasting spreadsheet, I struggle personally. So I think, with just those two examples in two companies, I think that shows why it's so hard to hire a product manager. Because if we couldn't get candidates who would be perfect for the company that she works in, but it's just not what we need. And the concepts are just very different across companies.
Yeah. Is it even possible to calculate and forecast the P&L in a spreadsheet? Like, how would you go about doing that for a live game?
Oh, it's possible with extremely intelligent modeling data analysts. It's not bulletproof. You can get a good idea.
Yeah. Cool. I had a few questions in relation to the things that you do, and then we'll talk a little bit about if it's even possible to do some sort of technical test.
Here live, you're going to test me.
Oh, I don't have any technical tests, but yeah, I mean, we could come up with one. I'll look for some dummy trick questions.
I'm not prepared for this. I didn't study.
This would be the best podcast ever. So you talk about, your day-to-day of defining the roadmap and live content and stuff. Like, what's your typical process for going about and doing that? Like, I think a lot of, PMs have to do that or are just assigned to that, but I don't know that anyone really knows the best way to go about, defining the roadmap and figuring out the live content. So what's your process?
I'll split them out because they're different. And in all of this, I'm collaborating with the game director because ultimately he's accountable for the vision and the strategy of the product. I'm more, at that high level, I'm more of a collaborator rather than being accountable for it. So in terms of the roadmap for the game, it's very important to have a super clear strategy for what are the main problems you need to improve for your game, and what metrics are you going to try to improve specifically? Because it's very different to say you're going to try to improve day 3 retention versus day 90 retention or day 200 retention, whatever it is. So first start with very clear objectives of what you're trying to accomplish. And then you do a process of just what I call discovery. You're understanding the market, you're doing competitive analysis, you're understanding your players, you play your game a lot to feel what your players are feeling. You think about, you ideate within the company, with friends, whoever it is. Ideas can come from anywhere on how are we going to improve these metrics that we've selected that are very important. And from all of that, you'll just have a lot of ideas that then you can filter through. There are different ways that you can prioritize. Some of them are more gut-based than others. You can, if you have an idea and you have a good estimation process within the team, you can estimate high level all of these different possibilities, and you can prioritize based on ROI, for example. So it really depends on what the internal process is as well, on how do you achieve the comparability to help you prioritize. And then you're not only looking at the game, but also looking at your live ops. You could be building live ops tools and understanding what are the pain points that our designers face within the team. What's making our release process slower? Do we have technical debt that we should be addressing to make the game faster, for example, to make it easier to implement new functionality into the game? So you have to look at all of these different parameters, and then you'll find out the prioritization of what you should be focusing on first. And circling back to the strategy is one of the main points as to how you do this prioritization. If it doesn't help you reach the metrics that you've defined as strategic to improve, then you should be thinking very hard why it's even on the table as a possibility.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the live ops calendar, it's always about how can you make the game more enjoyable for players? How can you increase the monetization of your live ops calendar? And by tying all of these things together, looking at your calendar, how long does it take to design this piece of content? And then how much money can we make from it? And you can also start applying ROI to all of these different design steps in your live calendar. That's where the tooling will help you optimize. And you just try to understand also the intensity of the different live ops formats and plan out, like, this huge intensity content should be spaced out. How much do we want to be spaced out? What's the depth of your game? What's the reward system? It depends. But once you have these objectives, high level, you can create what you like your live ops calendar to be, and what tooling you need in order to achieve it. So you have to kind of go beyond what you have right now, and then also build the tooling to help you get there.
Yeah. Okay. I have a ton of questions on both of these subjects, but you mentioned two core things with live ops of, like, how can you make the game more enjoyable and how can you improve the monetization? A lot of people that I've talked to have kind of felt like those two things are polar opposite of, like, you can't make the game more enjoyable while improving monetization. So I'm curious, how do you go about doing those two potentially opposite goals?
Let's call them opposite.
I don't know that I would, but I've heard them called that way by other people. So,
if players are having fun, then they'll want to spend money to have even more fun. So I think it's a lot about how do you balance difficulty against rewards? Is there a way that you can maintain a pattern of difficulty so that they feel that the effort level to get a certain reward maintains stable across the different types of content and scarcity of the reward that they're getting? And I have to understand the actual game design to talk more in specifics. But it's just understanding how does your game economy work? What are the different rewards that you can give out? How much effort do players have to invest in order to get that reward? Is it multiplayer? Is it PvP? Is it PvE? How do you balance the difficulty? I'm sorry, it's very hard to give a specific answer without speaking about a particular game.
Well, let's pick a game. What's a game that you play that's not your game? Because we won't go into those KPIs. But what do you play? What do you play outside?
What do I play outside? I play Rise of Cultures right now.
I'm
terrible with names, so I'm going to have to look at my phone to see what games I am playing. I play Colorful Stage, which is kind of a BeatStars, but way harder. And I'm also currently playing Skyweaver.
Yeah. So, of this super hard BeatStar game, as you know, think about it from a player perspective, but also with your PM hat on, like, what would you do to make the game more enjoyable?
Right. I see. Now, this is a technical test. You're putting me on the spot for this technical test.
Yeah.
I personally don't think I'm the audience that they're targeting for the game. I think they're targeting an audience that likes sort of Japanese music, Japanese electronic music a lot. So it's very hyper, the game. And so I easily just get burnt out of all of these high intensity, high BPM music that I'm trying to keep up with the rhythm.
Yep.
So I honestly really like the monetization of BeatStar in a way, where each time I'm playing a song, I feel like I'm making progress towards getting another song. And that's what I'm missing in this game that I'm playing, because I spent about an hour on the weekend playing it, and I left the game feeling like I made no progression. And so if they just gave me, even if it's an achievement or just a little tracker that, depending on the number of songs that I'm playing, I'm getting a little bit closer just by engaging, not particularly winning, but just engaging is getting me somewhere, I think it would just make it better. And I think that's something that a lot of games can do, is do you reward engagement or do you reward winning? And sometimes just reward engagement, because the player will be having fun with your product and you get them sticking around for longer. Maybe eventually they'll feel like monetizing even if it's not early on in the game, but just keep them having fun and maybe one day they'll pay.
So this actually brings me to a topic which we've talked about before. And this is almost the idea of the depth of mastery of content in a game can lead to amazing retention, but if it's too deep or the mastery is too hard, it can actually cause players to churn or make it too difficult for new players to come in. And what I mean by that is, like, take, League of Legends, like the ranked mode. Like, as a new player, I can't imagine trying to come in and learn all the champions and all the things that are in there. Fortnite, their big differentiator was building. But after a while, building got to be such a core part of it where, like, if you couldn't keep up with this massive building and stuff that's going on there, like, you just got outmatched. And I think that led to churning. And then, they did the live ops month where they had no building and a whole bunch of new players came, or old players or whatever, came back into the game. And now they have the no build mode. Just like League of Legends, they have the ARAM mode where, like, if you don't want the stress of all the things, you just kind of go to this chaotic, no stress mode that you can play in and stuff. Do you think that, this game, the BeatStars on Speed, which has this high mastery cap, could learn a lesson there, like, have like a easy mode, or like once a week they release a song that's like a low skill cap, or, it's less about just hitting the notes perfectly, and it's more about like how you hit them, maybe like the style and the feel of music. So I don't know if you play music at all, but like it's not just about like hitting things as hard as you can or as fast as you can. It's like the way that you play them, the way that you strum the cello or the guitar or whatever. So there's a lot more that goes into those kind of things. So do you think something like that, could engage the audience, or is it strictly just like you're the wrong audience and they're just really targeting these people that are like hyper energetic?
Well, the game doesn't block you from playing hard mode. And I'm the type of player that if there's a hard mode, I'm going to want to play it. And I think what happened is I just got thrown into the deep end. And so I can't win. And now when I go to the easy mode, I just feel that I'm not very good. And so I don't want to play easy mode because of the label it puts on me as a player. It's just this behavioral psychology that's going on. But I think this is exactly why making games is hard. And before I got into the game industry, I've always played a lot of games. I used to think, how hard can it be? And then I joined the industry and, oh yeah, gosh, it's very, very hard. Because you have to balance the depth of mastery, the elder game, having a nice TUI to get the player comfortable and into the game. You also need depth of spend. And so how do you do all of these things when creating a game? It's extremely difficult. But yes, I agree that the depth of mastery ideally is introduced, depending on the game genre, is introduced in a soft way, so that you just don't throw the player into the deep end of having to know everything at once. And I think that's where a lot of just improving your TUI and how do you unlock the game over time with the player's engagement and their progression, so that they don't have access to everything at once. You just take them through that journey and do a lot of A/B testing to find out what's that journey that has the best outcomes for the product.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Cool. Now, thinking about this game, how would you improve the monetization? Or I guess, well, first off, how do they do monetization in this game?
It has a lot of features. I haven't fully figured it out. Apart from, you can buy songs. You can go into the store, you can buy songs, and then because you're playing with a band, you can choose what band you want to start with. They have covers of songs, so you can buy the originals, or you can buy covers from the different bands. Or I think you can also, I don't remember if we have some loot boxes, but they probably do. Most games have some kind of loot box. So, yeah, it gives you more options of music to play with. So again, very similar to BeatStar. You're having fun. You get tired of the songs that you're playing. You want to go and buy new songs to get new challenges and trying to figure out how the different rhythms work so that you can get your best high score.
Yeah. So how would you improve that monetization then?
Well, it's hard to explain because I'm not motivated to spend. And I think
that's the wrong answer. You failed the question.
It actually also happened to me on BeatStar, and it happens on the majority of mobile games that I get highly engaged with, but then I don't spend, is that it doesn't make me feel that if I spend, I don't feel it's going to be long-lasting, that it's going to make a difference. And I'm actually quite a cautious spender. I don't spend quite a lot. I only spend when I feel that I'm going to get a good return. I apply my product manager thought when thinking about the spends that I make. And yeah, I think that's, for example, with BeatStar and with this game as well. I could buy a song, but then I play that song, and then what? That's £5 for a song. It's quite expensive. I can buy a coffee and a
The
croissant.
answer we were looking for was a Web3 game where you can buy it as an NFT and then resell the game.
Right.
Not serious there, but, could have gone with it. Yeah. So, I mean, why do you think it's £5 for a song? Because you get the song forever? Like, do you think that maybe having some sort of like limited mode where you get to like play this song for a short period of time, or like cheaper versions of songs or things? Or is it really all just like all this ideation and then testing and iteration?
Testing and iteration. Again, it comes down with a lot of who are you as a product manager, and I like doing upfront analysis, but sometimes the time you spend doing the analysis, if you can get it out the door in a sprint, then just start somewhere and iterate, validate, see what players do when it's out there. A/B test a lot, like different price points when you're releasing something new, and see what consequence that has in the metrics. I have been proven wrong so many times by A/B tests, where everyone in the room thought this was the best idea ever. This was going to completely change the early retention metrics. It was just going to deliver the whole strategy in a single feature. And then we released it and nothing happened. Nothing. And so this is why it's so important to just develop quick. Here at Hutch, we follow a lot the lean methodology. Develop quick, get it out quick, validate, and then use that data to continuously improve. And like 80-20 rule, don't try to get it to 100. Get it to a place where it delivers the value. The bells and whistles can come later. So just deliver what you need to test it and see the value. And then if it works, later on you can add the bells and whistles. Players usually don't mind, as long as it's not buggy, you know.
Yeah. So going back to hiring PMs, now that I've asked you some questions and things, do you think that asking, questions like that, like taking them into a real world scenario as much as possible, and then just like listening to their thought process is a good way to vet someone or see like, hey, they have the potential to be able to do X, Y, and Z? Or
yeah, definitely. You want to, skills can be taught, and just ways of working, knowing to do certain processes and whatnot. You can teach someone a skill, but it's very difficult to change how they think and what's their thought process and what's their logic. And so having those conversations with PMs where it's more of it's a conversation more than an interview, where you ask a lot of questions and you try to understand how do they think. Like faced with an unexpected problem, what steps are they telling you that they're going through in their mind in order to not come to a final answer, but come to a hypothesis to then go and check?
I love that. Are there any other sorts of tests or interviews that you think you should do or not do when looking for a PM?
I think a simple test of probability is usually a good one for a product manager. And something that I love for my interview here at Hutch is that they have a base builder game. So it's a spreadsheet game of trying to optimize how you're building a base. And it tells you quite a lot about how a product manager thinks by putting them within a gaming structure and seeing how they're solving the puzzle.
I love that.
But did I pass the test? I feel I may have failed. I don't know, Tom. What do you think?
No, the answer was actually iterate and test everything, so you passed. Because I too am probably wrong, 90% of the time on things. So you never know until you test.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, if you're okay with it, I'd love to spend the last 8 minutes just talking about live ops, cadence, revenue goals and stuff, because I think this is something that a lot of gaming product managers do face, at least with live games. So I'm curious, how do you go about setting a live ops cadence for a game? And kind of what I mean by that is there's a really great article out there by Harshil about Homescapes is a masterclass in live ops. And it talks about how Homescapes is really designed, and they looked at player behavior, and they saw that, players really don't have a lot of time during the week, and they're mostly, women that are 35 plus or whatever. I don't know what they actually are. But they don't have a lot of time during the week. They maybe log in for like a game or two and then they log off. They don't have time. And then on the weekends, they've got a lot more time. And so Homescapes basically like has 5 different events that are running at any given time. And they kind of cater throughout the week. And so like Monday through Thursday, there are these really easy events where like if you log in and you play a game or two, you get some pretty cool, decent, nice rewards. It's like, well, you might as well log in and do that. Otherwise, you're just kind of leaving it on the table. But then Friday, Saturday hit, and they've got these really intensive monetization-oriented events where there's like really sweet prizes at the end of them. But you've got to win like 10 games in a row. And, the pressure to do that spending in match 3 really intensifies when you're on game 9 or game 10 and you only have like one move left to, blow up everything and win it. And if you give up and lose, you have to start all over again from game 1 and work your way back up. And so high pressure, high reward versus the rest of the week, it's kind of low pressure, low reward kind of things that are kind of blended together. But I think what really struck me there is they base that on existing player behaviors of like how much time do they have to actually play this game on each particular day, and they design their live ops according to that. So I'm curious, you talked a little bit about cadence in the sense of intensity of events, where you said you shouldn't have 2 really, really intense events, one right after the other, because you might burn out your players. But how do you think about designing the optimal cadence of like how often should you have those super intense events and when should you have them,
The great old answer, test. Because I don't think there are golden rules. Should you not have 2 overlapping high intensity events? Maybe you should. It depends on who are your players. Have you done it before? Have you actually measured and see if it has cannibalization impacts, if it affects the engagement metrics? Maybe your game is just so hardcore that players will love it because they have to be playing. There's so much to do in your game and high stakes in different areas. They have to think about, okay, where am I going to invest? Which one do I have the best odds to win? How can I improve my hand in order to reach for example, the higher, how do you call it, on the leaderboard, higher positions on the leaderboard. So until you try it and you get to know your players, I think, setting a rule without having tried it first you can be missing an opportunity, because maybe it just increases your game's revenue by doing that.
So I'm going to push back here a little bit.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask you a question and say, what things or what times shouldn't you test something? Like, when is it bad? So here's an example of when I saw testing go awry. So a good buddy of mine had a game that they had launched. It's been a while now, but at this point in time, it was fairly recent. Doing great. It was like 300,000 daily active users, 44% ARPDAU, and growing, doing amazing. And they continued to test and improve the game and whatnot. But what actually was happening behind the scenes is they were doing live ops, and a lot of the live ops and the monetization was actually coming from special offers. And they were, in a sense, giving away too much content because they were doing these tests that kept pushing them to like more and more special offers, and players stopped buying the baseline content and kept waiting for like the big deal offers and waiting more and more. And then they were kind of like stuck in this loop, and eventually they decided to try to do a test where they like get rid of those offers and let your, at least really bring them back, rein them in to try to get back to something that's stable. Well, they got back to stable, but they lost tens of thousands of spending players, and like their revenue was just wiped out effectively. Like still doing decent, but nowhere near where they were. And so, I'm curious, like, are there any times when you really need to think very cautiously about what you're testing and how you're designing those tests for?
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's about risk. Measuring the risk of the test you're thinking about running versus the value of what you'll learn from it. For example, we're currently redesigning the UX of the store in the game. And for us we initially set out that we wanted to A/B test it. But then after some conversations with the complete team, the engineers, QA, design, we actually realized that the cost of running the A/B test for technical reasons, it was just so high that no matter what learnings we got, it's going to be extremely difficult for the test to have been worth it. And so we decided not to A/B test. So similarly, you have to understand if you're testing against a behavior that's already so ingrained within players or so ingrained within why they spend, you have to be quite cautious in just trying to analyze what are we trying to learn from it, and are the learnings is the value of the learnings higher than the risk of the potential negatives. And then you also have ways that you can manage the risk. If it's a very risky test, you can have a smaller percentage in the experimental cohort. You can only allow players to enter that experimental cohort until it reaches the minimum number that you need for statistical confidence, and then you close it and you keep running the test. So there are also ways that you can mitigate. But sometimes it's just not worth it.
Makes sense. Yeah, I only asked because you brought up, well, why wouldn't you do two high-intensity events together? And I was just curious, well, could that actually cause a bunch of players to get angry and churn? And, then there's the balance of what's our risk of us losing these players or whatnot.
Yeah, I agree. I was speaking from my personal experience. And as well, in terms of who are your players, what are their behaviors, and being extremely data-driven before running your experiments. The question I ask is, how big is your team? Because you can have teams developing mobile games that have, 150, 200 people, more. And then you have teams developing mobile games, they're 20 people.
Three sometimes.
You have one game designer, you have one data analyst. The amount of data that you need to analyze to find these learnings sometimes just shots on goal because you don't have that number of people to rely on.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, Maria, I know we're pretty much out of time here. I feel like I keep talking for another hour or so. But we are on the Mastering Retention podcast. So I always like to ask, what's one tip or trick or lesson you've learned over the years to increase player retention? Like, how do you keep your players engaged and playing for longer?
I knew you were going to ask this, and I had an answer ready, but I've already used my answer, so I'll have to reuse it. It's just something that I've been learning. This is the first time I'm working as a product manager on the game, but across any product I've worked on, and even speaking with a lot of people and looking at how other games operate within Hutch, I think there's something that's very critical, and it's to know your strategy. Because ideas are in abundance. Ideas can come from anywhere. And unless you have a defined anchor that only gets moved when it's very purposeful to move, you can get a bit lost and just be all over the place. And then you're not trying to iterate enough in achieving a goal. So if you have a strategy and you stick to it and you let it guide you, you'll be trying to do enough experiments and improvements in order to reach a valuable result. And that could be to increase retention.
I love it. Always start with the problem, deeply understand the problem, and then figure out from there. There's actually a talk he was like the game director at Supercell on the Clash of Clans, and he gave this amazing talk about how they focused on the problems, went through and added some things which ultimately led to the successful launch of their Gold Pass. But had they not focused on the problems and fixed some underlying things, the Gold Pass never would have worked. So if you haven't seen that talk, go find it and listen to it. But Maria, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me. If people do have any questions or anything, is there a good way for them to get in contact with you? Yeah, just send me a message on LinkedIn. Add me a connection invite. I'm on Twitter, but I don't really have any DMs open. So, I'm old school. Just contact me on LinkedIn. I'm always very happy to talk about product management and to connect. Love it. Well, thank you so much for joining. Thanks for the invite. All right. Cheers.
Bye.